Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Eben here, and for this week's video I wanted to try out something new. So for the past few weeks, I've been running my group mentorship session with a small number of students, and today I wanted to take some of that artwork and go through it and sort of talk about some of the mistakes I see with a lot of beginner artists. And we're going to talk about some ways we can improve this painting and make it really shine. So thanks to Sam for letting me use his painting as a punching bag for this video, and thanks to all of you for watching. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos I release every Wednesday, as well as live streams on Sundays. Okay, let's dive right in. Okay, so one of the first things I'm seeing in this image that sort of feels a little bit off to me is the balance. I feel like overall I'm seeing kind of a heavy left-sided balance to this whole picture. So, and we can kind of check that by flipping it back and forth a little bit. It's not too extreme, but I think I want to mess around with that a little bit in terms of the overall composition. The second thing I'm seeing compositionally is sort of this object over here is this tree, and it's a very sort of complex, interesting, high contrast object that's really just lining up with the side of the canvas here and right into the corner. So it's sort of attracting the eye and drawing it off the page into the upper right corner. And really, you know, the goal with any painting is you want to be able to bring the viewer in and keep them within your painting, because people's attentions are fickle. And of course, especially in today's world, you know, we want to be able to capture people's attention quickly and to hold it on the painting, because the more people look at art, the better they're going to feel. So let's just sort of see if we can dive in here and make some quick changes here. So I'm not sure what I want to do about that tree. Let's just sort of, I'm going to kind of copy it. I don't think it's a super essential element to this piece. Really, you know, this whole painting is about these characters as well as this building here. So I think it's kind of a dispensable element, but we can just put it on a new layer in case we want to use it later. I think what I want to do about the balance issue is take this sort of really heavy, and when I say heavy, I mean like visually heavy. It's a large, dark object against a white background, and it's very high up in the canvas. It's sort of taking up this left quarter of the image here. So I think what I want to do is I'm going to actually take this and move it over to the other side and see how that looks, because that's something we can use to frame the other side of this composition here. And then we can just sort of quickly erase some of this out, blend it in. Boom. Now, as with this other side here, I think I want to open this up. I really want to allow focus to be funneled into this castle here, because this is a really interesting feature of this painting. What I'm kind of seeing with the way these shapes are set up is it's sort of funneling focus around it, and it is serving, these spaces are serving as composition blockers to keep the eye from going off the edge of the page. But I really want things over here to be pointing in, to be sort of funneling attention directly in and kind of pointing at this structure. So I'm just going to grab my a quick digital brush here, and I'm just going to sort of go in and get rid of some of that structure there. We can sort of keep some of it in as a framing device down here, but notice how that sort of opens up the whole piece a little bit more, lets it breathe a little bit. And of course that depends upon your intentions with the piece. If you want it to be a bit more claustrophobic, you know, as if these characters are maybe sort of you know, under pressure, or they're emerging from a dark space or something. But I think, you know, for this, you know, this is really about having a view, having a vista of this, you know, expansive landscape here. So I kind of want to emphasize that by sort of getting rid of anything that's going to kind of get in our way. So I'm going to push that back even more, actually, so we can really get a glimpse as to the context of this entire landscape here. That also gives us an opportunity to tell a little bit about the surrounding environment and how this castle is kind of interacting with things around it. So for example, we can create a pathway going up to it. We could maybe create some kind of, you know, visual path to get from where these characters are in the foreground over to where that castle is. Now another thing I want to think about here is utilizing the full space of the canvas. And now this isn't always something you have to do. You can create a really tight focus in your image if you want, but I think generally I try to, if I have two focal areas like we do here, we have our characters, our sort of group of people down here, and then we have this castle. It can be really useful to space them out in the canvas so that you have an opportunity for the eye to travel between these points and maybe create a journey between them to sort of create a fun, interesting experience for your viewer. Because essentially, you know, everything else here, if the whole story is about, you know, this simple area right here, then there's really no reason for a lot of this other stuff to exist besides just a really elaborate framing. So I want to make sure I'm using the full space of the canvas, or at least a bit more than we're using here. So I'm actually going to take these characters, I'm going to copy them, paste them, move them over here. In fact, I don't think this rock is really doing anything but sort of stealing attention away from everything else. It's a very high contrast object that's sort of right where we might want our focal point to be. So I'm going to plop these characters right there. And then we can go in and paint over these other ones. Okay, so now we've got our characters over there. I'm just going to do a quick selection so that we can sort of embed them in the image here. And then of course I'm going to go behind and sort of do what I promised to do here and grab my mixer brush here, because I really like to use the mixer brush sometimes for these edits, because you know, I find that a lot of beginner work tends to look a bit stiff, and they really like their solid shapes and their boundaries, and I'm always kind of trying to push the students to explore lost edges and things like that, and really sort of explore some areas of vagueness in their paintings to sort of contrast sharper elements and create a stronger focus around that. Okay, so now we can see there's a bit of breathing room between these two interesting areas. You know, we have our characters over here, we have our distant object here. The people are creating a visual cue for us to follow. They are looking out, so we can see them as a high contrast object, and then look out at this castle here. So, okay, so the next thing I'm sort of seeing here is this rock again. Like, there's just a lot here. It's sort of disruptive to the whole pattern of the image. So I'm once again just going to I'm just going to sort of get rid of that. And you know, we don't have to get rid of all those values there. Some of these shadow values can be very interesting as part of this piece. And Sam has used the lasso tool quite a bit here, which is great. It's an awesome tool and you should use it. But again, I'm going to sort of think about how I can contrast those hard edges with some softer edges elsewhere and create a bit of texture and a bit of variety. So you're going to see me doing that kind of throughout the piece as well. And another thing I'm going to probably do here is we have a nice, big, beautiful open sky and a lot of really saturated blues in the shadows, but it's sort of at odds with what we would expect from the sky color on a clear day like this. Of course, if you want it to be overcast, we can paint it as overcast, but since there's a lot of direct sunlight here and there are already some clouds represented here, I'm just going to assume that you know, Sam meant to create a bright sunny day here. So I'm going to see if I can select some of this sky color and increase that saturation a little bit. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is select everything beyond this foreground position and increase that nice blue saturation that we often see on big sunny days. Okay, let's bring up our saturation menu here. Let's bring up that blue a little bit, and of course I've sort of accidentally divided up my thing into a bunch of layers here, so I'm actually just going to go ahead and merge all these down. And then we're going to use that selection once again. Let's bump up our saturation. I just want to get a lot of blue here. And actually, let's use a color balance so we can bring up the blue in our shadow tones and in the sky. Now, the color range is pretty limited for this distant area, but we do still have some highlights, so I want to push the warmness in the highlights a little bit, see if we can just sort of parse out the warmer sections from the cooler ones here. But overall, we can go back in and paint in some warmer sections later, but I really want to establish that nice blue that we often see in distant objects, in the shadows of distant objects, as well as in the sky color on a bright sunny day. So I'm actually not quite getting the effect I want there as far as the tone of this sky, so let's just go in with our mixer brush and see if we can get a more saturated version of this color here. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to start thinking about how I want to format this sky, and maybe how I want to use this sky to draw more attention to specific areas in my painting. Now Sam's already doing something great here with this cloud. It's helping to draw focus from that sort of upper right quadrant in around past the castle here. So I'm going to sort of continue that trend a little bit and see if we can't have some cloud shapes that are sort of coming in from the left side, and maybe bringing the eye in a little bit this way. I'm also going to go into these cloud shapes and just give them a little bit of fluff, a little bit of lost edges, because as you may know by now, I love some lost edges. That's just kind of something I'm really attracted to in a painting, and especially when they're sort of contrasted against some harder areas of sharpness, especially around the focal points. So I'm going in there and I'm just creating some lost edges, and I'm shaping the clouds a little bit, and I rarely end up using anything other than this mixer brush from my brush pack here, which by the way you can find in the link in the description below. I rarely use anything besides this for my clouds, and that's just because I like to keep it simple, and it's just so much fun to paint with this brush. It's very close to sort of a more traditional style brush. And I'm also just trying to create a clear distinction between the clouds and the sky color. You know, there can be some areas where that boundary is blurred, but I do want to make it clear, especially on a sunny day like this, that there is a separation between clouds and the sky, just to make it clear that skylight is shining through. And then we can use another cloud, you know, something a bit more wispy on this side. And what you'll notice too with clouds is as they approach the horizon line, they do flatten out quite a bit, so that's why you're going to see some of these clouds down here. Probably, we're also going to be viewing them from a different angle, so we're going to see more of the side of these clouds. I do have a cloud tutorial video up here as well. You can check that out. I'll post a link in the video here once I upload it. And but yeah, these clouds towards the horizon line are just going to tend to be a bit flatter, and then we're going to see some more condensed atmosphere down there towards the bottom. I also want to think about giving these clouds some perspective shapes and really help them utilize you know, this three-dimensional space here. So they're going to sort of, a lot of them are going to have this kind of Nike symbol pattern here, where they sort of expand towards the top edge of the canvas and flatten and sort of thin out towards the bottom here. So we got some nice cloud shapes. We've got some great perspective going on here. There's a little bit of storminess going on behind this focal area, and I'm thinking that, you know, just to really ramp up the contrast here, we can take advantage of that sort of atmospheric depth where the clouds tend to gather towards the lower part of the horizon, and we're just going to use that to create some stronger contrast around this building here. Okay, and the next thing I'm noticing is this mountain here is just looking a little bit out of place. The color range and tone and everything for that is just not quite working out. So I think what I'm going to do is we're just going to paint over this for a minute here. And I think also the shape was sort of interrupting the cadence and the flow between our characters here and this big castle we have here in the distance. So I want to make sure that that's a clear path, or at least a simple, interesting path that the eye can follow from one end to the other. But since this is a distant area and there are going to be some shadows there, I'm going to pretty much pick the same color as the sky there. Maybe we can dull it down just a bit and darken it just to indicate that it's not the sky itself. But I'm just going to kind of use some of those tones, especially on the shadow side of these mountains. Our light source is coming from the upper right side. So I'm going to think about that when I'm sculpting these areas. And I'm just going to keep pushing the saturation there until it looks just about right, because those distant shadow areas really can take on a strong blue hue, especially once again on these bright sunny days here. By the way, I'm just painting this all on one layer. You really don't need to break things down into too many layers if you're just doing a relatively quick painting. If you are doing something more extensive, sometimes it can be useful to expand into 2 or maybe 3 layers. Of course, everyone has their own workflow, but for me personally, I really just prefer to keep it simple and sort of keep my focus on the painting process and not have to worry too much about all these different areas I'm setting up here. Also, typically I would be bringing up a reference for something like this. I'm just sort of drawing on my visual library here just to keep it quick. Once again, this isn't I'm not going to spend too much time on this piece. I just want to kind of go through and make some quick adjustments here. So now we've kind of adjusted this mountain element back here. I'm going to bring in just a little bit of atmospheric perspective here as well. We can use our lasso tool to select this area down here, and then grab a big soft round brush here and just go towards the bottom, create a little bit of mist, and that's really going to sort of create the impression of distance. We can do the same thing at the base of this structure here. Just go in with this large soft brush, maybe darken it a little bit because this is kind of a shadowy area here. But then over here, because our light source is coming up from the right side, we can lighten it and sort of move it a little into more of a warmer range where that light is sort of hitting some of this atmosphere here. And we don't want to go overboard with it because we don't want to lose too many of our details. But that should be sufficient to sort of create the impression of some nice fogginess, some nice depth there. Okay, so some of the last things I've done here to sort of shape this up, I've just gone in and done a little bit of detail work. I've brought a little bit more value range around the focal area. I've adjusted the perspective a little bit to bring the plane on the right side down so we can see that clear perspective distinction there, give it a bit more of a three-dimensional look. I've increased the highlights around the base of the building there where all the light is hitting, just so we can get some nice contrast there and really solidify it as our focal point, get some nice light happening there. I did end up sort of taking out a bit of that light from the windows because during a really bright day like this, it's just really unlikely we're going to be able to see that from this distance. Other than that, a lot of this is just some small detailing stuff and some minor adjustments to the characters. I added a little bit of bounce light up on there. I lightened up the shadow color to reflect the sky a bit more, and overall just made some tweaks to the foreground to incorporate a little more three-dimensionality there. So I hope you found this video helpful, and please feel free to leave a comment below if you have any questions or any requests for future content. And of course, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to find out more about getting into the group mentorship session or doing one-on-one work and doing paintovers like this with your own work, feel free to let me know. There's a link to my mentorship program in the description below. You can just follow that and check out the various options there. And of course, feel free to contact me and ask me if you have any questions. Alright, that's it for today. Hope you all have a great week.